Welcome to the Deep Wealth Podcast, where you learn how to extract your business and personal deep wealth. I'm your host, Jeffrey Feldberg. This podcast is brought to you by Deep Wealth and the 90-Day Deep Wealth Experience. When it comes to your business deep wealth, your exit or liquidity event is the most important financial decision of your life. But unfortunately, up to 90% of liquidity events fail. Think about all that time and your hard-earned money wasted. Of the quote-unquote successful liquidity events, most business owners leave 50% to over 100% of the deal value in the buyer's pocket and don't even know it. I should know. I said no to a seven-figure offer and yes to mastering the art and the science of a liquidity event. 2 years later, I said yes to a different buyer with a 9-figure deal. Are you thinking about an exit or liquidity event? Don't become a statistic and make the fatal mistake of believing the skills that built your business are the same ones to sell it. After all, how can you master something you've never done before? Let the 90-Day Deep Wealth Experience and the 9-step roadmap of preparation help you capture the best deal instead of any deal. At the end of this episode, take a moment and hear from business owners like you who went through the Deep Wealth Experience. Rita McGrath is a best-selling author, a sought-after advisor and speaker, and a longtime professor at Columbia Business School. Rita is one of the world's top experts on strategy and innovation and is consistently ranked among the top 10 management thinkers in the world, including the #1 award for strategy by Thinkers 50. Rita's recent book on strategic inflection points is Seeing Around Corners: How to Spot Inflection Points in Business Before They Happen. Rita is the author of 4 other books, including the best-selling The End of Competitive Advantage. Welcome to the Deep Wealth Podcast, and you heard it in the official introduction. We have a thought leader. She is going to rock your world. And not only a thought leader, a fellow podcaster, best-selling author, you name it, she's been there, she's done that. When you check out her webpage and check the show notes, we have a link. It couldn't be any easier. Some of the top brands in the world, she is there. But I'm going to put a plug in it. Rita, welcome to the Deep Wealth Podcast. An absolute pleasure to have you with us. And I'm curious, Rita, there's always a story behind the story. What's your story? What got you to where you are today?
Oh, curiosity. My children would say nosiness. I graduated college actually with a political science degree and thought I would go into government and politics and sort of policy making. And I did spend about 8 years doing that after I got my master's. And then what I realized was that in the public service, your career goes straight up and to the right for the first 10 years, and then it flatlines after that. And I'd always had an interest in academia. And at that time, you may recall, this is right about when you were running your business, MBAs were just taking off. And there just weren't enough college professors with PhDs to teach them. So I thought, well, it sounds like an interesting opportunity. So and I landed at the Wharton School, where I went to work at Ian McMillan's Entrepreneurship Center. And so while I was in the public service, I'd done this large scale change at the time. At the time, we called it computerization. Today, we would call it digital transformation or some other more modern word. But computers were kind of seen as these alien things, right, that were popping up on desktops. What I got really interested in was this problem of large-scale organizational change and transformation. And so I went to my advisor, he became my advisor, and I said, oh, I'd love to study the science of implementation, like how things get done. And he looked at me and he said, I can't think of anything more boring than the science of implementation. So we were kind of at an impasse. And then fortune smiled upon us in the form of a gentleman by the name of Ira Rimmerman, who was with Citibank at the time. And they were interested in sponsoring a research project, a 3-year research project, which would look at detailed case studies of all of their corporate ventures, the successful ones, the failed ones, what made the big difference. And that led to a framework for how they could think about corporate venturing. And it also led to my fascination with innovation, entrepreneurship, doing new things, which the mechanisms are very similar to what it takes to do implementing major transformational change.
Wow. So quite the story, very humble beginnings, and you're really at the forefront with technology and what later we now call, thanks to you, inflection points. And in your book, Seeing Around Corners, which we'll talk about it in a moment. But I have to ask you, Rita, what was it like back in the day as all of this thought leadership was emerging and companies were making these catastrophic decisions, knowingly or unknowingly, and you're right in the thick of things and you're seeing this as it rolls out? What did it feel like? What were you thinking?
Well, back back then, there was not what I would describe as a well-understood theory of corporate venturing or corporate entrepreneurship. People back then looked at sort of products that would come out of the R&D lab or something that the engineers would come up with, and they'd sort of dress it up and then it would go into the market. But there was no idea that it was an actual process. And as you've alluded to, I got really interested in these stories of these massive flops, like 1992, Euro Disney launches with a theme park that could hold 60,000 people to find that only 25,000 turned up, or FedEx, it was zap mailing documents one way or the other, only to find that the fax machines made them unnecessary, or TV Cable Week, which was this thing that Time tried to produce. Anyway, these big corporate flops. And, I got really interested in how could this be? I mean, these are smart companies, smart people. If you looked at the business plans, they were all like 6 inches deep with tons of market research and blah, 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 blah. And what my colleague and I realized was that the main challenge was that these companies were embarking into uncertain spaces with the same tools and the same mindset that they were using to do things they already understood really well. So the same big dense plans, the same net present value calculations, the same, you name it, they were doing it. And so we took a big step backward and we said, well, how would we plan if you knew you didn't have the answers? What would you do to create discipline around this startup if you knew you didn't have the answer? And we took a lot of inspiration from people like you, serial entrepreneurs who'd started multiple businesses and were very, very good at keeping costs low, doing a lot of exploration, doing a lot of learning before making a big commitment to anything. And right around there, I got fascinated with the concept of real options, which are small investments organizations make in the present that buy them the right to make future choices. In a big contrast to the way most companies at the time were doing things, with an options mindset, you can try a lot of stuff, recognizing most of it won't work. Whereas what corporations were doing was they were saying, okay, every time we decide to do something new, we're going to make a big bet as though it was going to go all the way through to completion. And a lot of times you learn that what you thought was going to work doesn't work. And the sensible thing to do is to stop. But the way that companies were planning sort of got them on this treadmill of not being willing to alter course, not being willing to stop. And so that would have been back in the 90s. And of course, fast forward to today, we've now got a pretty well-developed set of ideas about how you become a disruptor, how you can create new things. I'm not saying it's easy, but at least we're starting to see a real methodology emerge.
And Rita, as you're going through that, I'm putting myself in the shoes. It could be someone who's a startup. It could be someone who perhaps is leading the charge to the corporate world, or it could be a titan of business who is paranoid, all kinds of topics and books on that and some great thought leadership with that as well, who's looking over the shoulder saying, okay, what can't I see? Who can't I see that's going to come out of nowhere and really harm my business or put me out of business? And you so eloquently talk about that in your book, Seeing Around Corners. And for our listeners, in the show notes, it'll be a point and click, as well as to Rita's other books, and we'll talk about that. But in Seeing Around Corners, how to spot inflection points in business before they happen. Regardless of where someone is in the business journey, what would you tell that listener? Well, why are inflection points important, and why should they make the effort to understand them?
Absolutely. So I define an inflection point, following Andy Grove, as some shift in the environment or in technology that creates a 10x change in what's possible. I lived with that for a long time and I didn't know what to do with it. I was like, okay, so an inflection point creates a major change. As you said, if somebody was looking over my shoulder, what would I advise them? But then I realized that these things feel, when they burst upon the scene, as though they came out of nowhere. But if you go back and look, they've actually been building up for a really long time. And I like to talk about the famous Ernest Hemingway line when one character asks another, how did you go bankrupt? And the answer was 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly. And that's the case with inflection points, that they burble along. I mean, if you think about it, we have had the Jetsons since 1962. We're still mulling over. I just saw the other day, there's a regulatory authority for this car that can also fly. And it's just been cleared for its initial tests. I mean, it's taken since 1962. So how many years is that before the thing that we could conceive of actually becomes a reality? So I think what I would advise people is make the time. Take that time regularly, take a big step back and look at what are the assumptions underlying your current business operations that some shift might change. And of course, right now, the buzz is all about ChatGPT, right? And it's actually pretty good. And there are a lot of things it can do. So it's going to change the cost effort parameter for content creation, for journalism, for getting your message out, for the difficulty of sustaining your message, maybe for podcasting. And if I was in any of those fields or relied on any of those fields, I'd want to be paying a lot of attention to what are the shifts that get made now.
And Rita, offline, you and I were talking, and I'll bring the listeners in on that conversation. This kind of thought leadership, this thinking is so paramount. It's so important that in our 90-day deep wealth mastery, step one, big picture, this is exactly what we talk about. And offline, you're asking Jeffrey, what's your story? How did you get to where you got to? And it was exactly an inflection point that really changed in my case, for Embanet, it forever changed the trajectory. But inflection points, they're funny things, and you do a really eloquent job in the book. I mean, you talk about Microsoft, you talk about Netflix, Blockbuster, some of the more bigger ones, the companies that we know and hear about. The same inflection point, as we like to say in Deep Wealth Mastery, left unchecked, your competition or the market will put you out of business. Or if you can figure it out and you give a formula and a methodology of how to do that, if you can leverage that, you can put yourself out of business to go into a bigger business. So for the listener who's saying, okay, now you got my attention. Yeah, I'd love to get into a bigger, more profitable business. I want to be the one calling the shots. I want to put myself out of business. Where would one start big picture wise?
Well, I think you start with where are the areas where there's simultaneously really big problems shared by a lot of players and a lot of uncertainty and no current solution that's really viable. So I call these stepping stone options. And what they are is they're that sort of first foothold in a really burgeoning new area. And so what a lot of people do that don't do this well is they say, big attractive area, autonomous vehicles. And we're going to spend millions on it. We're going to create these big teams and we're going to have all this stuff. We're going to beat Google. We're going to outrace BMW or Bosch or whoever. And that to me is exactly the wrong way to go about getting on one of these growth curves, because what you'll do is you'll spend a lot of money, but because it's so uncertain, if you have a range of uncertainties, you're making a big bet that you're going to hit one particular point in that range. Whereas if you find a stepping stone option, and let's see if this corresponds with your experience, you're looking for a small market that has a big problem that current solutions just can't address, and they're willing to pay. And so what you want to do is start there. That becomes your stepping stone. So I'll give you an example. In the autonomous vehicle sector, right? People have literally spent $100 billion just chasing down whatever this might be. And yet there are stepping stones in that market. So if you think of the military, they have a problem supplying frontline troops. And the traditional solution is you have 2 troops in each truck driving. And it's not a very good use of their time. It's putting people in harm's way. But the robots aren't smart enough to take over the whole job yet. But the robots are smart enough to play follow the leader. So I think it's Northrop Grumman or Lockheed or one of those that came up with this system where you have 2 human beings in the first vehicle and then up to 6 vehicles daisy chaining along behind. Now, that's not what we think of when we think of the Jetsons and level 4, but you're getting paid handsomely because it's the military. So, they'll pay for it. And you're demonstrating the use case. And now you're learning, right? You're creating learning in a context in which you can be ahead of the curve because you're learning faster than others are and you're doing it profitably. So that's the kind of opportunity I recommend people start with.
And so when you look at that, and I love how you talk about stepping stones, we use similar but different terminology, look at it as an experiment. It's not a bet the farm decision. If it fails, which it probably will in the early days, you're not going out of business. It's a learning lesson and you go back at it and you keep on figuring out. But I know in the book, I loved how you talk about you picture these 2 lines where they can intersect, signal strength and degrees of freedom. And for most businesses, and whether you're an entrepreneur or in the C-suite, by the time that signal strength is really at its loudest, okay, now we're going to enter the market, you've missed it, it's too late. So can you talk about from that stepping stone to really that balance between the choices that we have, that signal strength, and how we should be thinking about that?
Right. Well, so the more data that you have, the more established the situation is. So remember, I was mentioning that you want to find opportunities in really high uncertainty situations. And that sounds kind of counterintuitive. And most traditional managers say to me, ooh, that sounds really risky. I don't want to do that. But if you think about it, by the time something's become well understood, you're now in diminishing returns. Like every additional dollar that you put into that is not going to deliver super big payback. Because we know this from financial theory and we know this from entrepreneurship theory that, people that make a lot of money go where there's enough volatility that your typical investor gets freaked out and won't do it. And so that's where the really big returns are. So when I'm talking about degrees of freedom, what I mean is if you can make your decisions when uncertainty is still reasonably well established, you can sort of get facts on the ground before everybody else has figured out what's going on. And that to me is the strategic opportunity. It's how do you take that, I call it a time zero event. The inflection has happened. Chat GPT is here, whatever it is that you're worried about right now. But then work backward. What would have to be true before that could happen? And that's where the strategic insights begin to get created, because now what you're doing is you're watching as these signals get stronger, you're able to see them moving forward. And that, I think, is the opportunity.
And let me ask you this, and you can say I'm completely on base or off base, because I can imagine some listeners who perhaps aren't part of the corporate world are saying, you know what, Rita, Jeffrey, I don't have a billion-dollar company. I don't have an army of people who are looking at all these things. And my response to that is, that's perfect, because that's going to be your competitive advantage. We all have access to the signal strength, in your words, to see what's happening or not happening. We can all figure out what's really a painful problem that people aren't solving. And here's the question for you. If we can be agile and we can be quick to respond, and we're doing really these stepping stones, these small experiments, we don't need to be a Fortune 10, Fortune 500, you pick it. We can be the ones that are really leading the way in this area, that we can become when leveraged well up there as a titan of business, as a Fortune 10 or 100 or 500, pick your number, if we do it well. What would you say to that?
I would totally agree. So one of the things to remember as a startup, as an entrepreneur, you actually can benefit from asymmetric competition. And what I mean by that is the people that you're competing against may have a lot to defend. And so their instinct is not going to be to probe the disruptive new area that could threaten their established core business. Their instinct is going to be to try to put up moats and prevent and defend. And what small companies can do in a much more agile way than big established ones is really get close to their customers. I think when entrepreneurs are at their best, they totally understand the customer's jobs to be done. They know what the pain points are. They know all the people that have to be lined up to get a particular solution to work. And in a big company, you're often dealing with that customer experience being split all over the place. You know, it's divided into functions and departments and regions and geographies. And so getting that sort of holistic view of what the customer's pain points are is often extremely difficult for a big firm.
And speaking of pain points, as we record this episode, I'm really relieved and happy to say the pandemic is behind us. We're now entering what some are calling the golden era of AI. And so, Rita, as you're out there, whether it be startups in the work that you're doing in your consultancy at ritamcgrath.com, and for our listeners, we'll have that in the show notes, or whether it's with some of the corporations that we all know the names and they're really the behemoths out there doing their things, what are you seeing big picture-wise? Are there some new trends that, I mean, there's always new trends, but what are you seeing that's emerging that you think would be of interest for our listeners?
I do think artificial intelligence as a class, software solutions, has a huge amount of shift. So what a lot of people have talked about is Netscape, that Netscape moment. Like that was the very first browser that introduced the masses to this thing called the internet. And, you know, it went through the classic hype cycle, right? Everybody was like, oh, not the internet. And everybody had to have web pages and, you know, and it was all go throughout the 90s. And then things kind of come back to earth again. So we're in the bubbly phase right now of AI startups. And what'll happen as people are experimenting. And again, we're high uncertainty, right? So nobody's completely sure what like the killer app is going to be or where this thing is going to start being felt. But out of all that experimentation are going to come some survivors. Now, most won't make it, but there'll be a few like demonstrated use cases. So if I had to place some bets, I'd be definitely looking at healthcare. The ability to mine huge amounts of structured data gives us the potential to do, for example, synthetic clinical trials. Where like right now, I mean, the standard for clinical trials is you give an affected population, half of them get a placebo and half of them get the real thing. Well, with big data and AI, you can now synthesize what an untreated population would look like and compare that to the treated population. And the advantage of that is if you're developing drugs for very ill people, this could be their last chance. And so putting half of them on a placebo is like kind of almost inhuman. And so things like that could really be huge major advances. So I think healthcare, certainly the communications business is going to be completely upended, as is the news business. I think, unfortunately, you're going to see a lot more junk out there. I think what you're going to have now is AI systems that are deleting the junk from other AI systems so that the human beings actually get something that is vaguely sensible. And you almost see this arms race emerging, where in order to combat the pernicious effects of some AI, there's another AI that gets developed to do stuff. And of course, it's imperfect yet. It still has hallucinations. You can't count on it. If you talk to somebody who's an expert and say, have you tried to use ChatGPT or one of these to do something that you do? All the experts will tell you, oh, it's terrible. The results are awful. Like if you talk to a writer, you say, did it write something fabulous for you? And the result is usually, no, it wasn't very good. But if you talk to an amateur and say, oh, did it write you a good poem or did it do you a good newsletter? They're all like, oh, yes, it was fabulous. So you've got this interesting thing where now amateurs are kind of making incorrect value judgments about the quality of what these systems are spitting out. I think that's super interesting.
We'll have to see where that goes. And, while you're talking about that, so whether it's the AI of today or the internet and the first browser of yesteryear that was on the scene, let me ask you a question that there's always going to be something new that's up and coming. What would you say, and I'm really leaning now on the art side of life, the art side of business, the mindset, how we approach things, how we view things. And specifically, as I'm talking with you about this, I'm going back to your book and seeing around corners. And you did such an eloquent job in talking about Microsoft and how they were doing really well on putting themselves out of business. That's the trajectory they were heading on with this old kind of mindset, and how really the mindset, these are my words now, you can agree or disagree, how the change in leadership and the change in mindset that came along with that, that's what ushered in, really, that was the saving grace for Microsoft to begin the climb back up and out there, to become relevant again, for profits to start getting back out there and becoming a daily part of our lives. So how would you say, or how does mindset play a role in all of this?
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. So if you're thinking about the kind of mindset that you need to be successful in rapidly changing environments, Microsoft would lean on the work of Carol Dweck, who talks about developing a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. And the distinction between the two is that a fixed mindset sort of views your ability to do something or having accomplished something as relatively static and unchanging. So I'm not good at math, for example. Whereas a growth mindset would be, well, I'm constantly on a learning journey. My goal is to improve. And the fact that I'm not good at something means that I've got a lot of opportunity to learn. And so I'm going after it with a learn mindset. So Satya Nadella would say things like, we needed to go from know-it-alls to learn-it-alls. And we needed to really embed that in our philosophy. The other thing that I think he did, which was less talked about, but equally important, was he said, we're all one Microsoft here. I mean, it used to be literally the divisions would compete for attention. The senior leaders would smart talk their way into being the smartest guys in the room. It was just incredibly competitive as a company, to a point that got dysfunctional. I mean, I think it served them really well in their early days. And then I think it just got very dysfunctional. So I think that was another element of the cultural change. Kathleen Hogan, who's the HR person who partnered with Satya on a lot of that change, was actually a P&L leader. And he turned to her to really say, we really need to rewire the culture of this company. How do we think about doing that? Another thing that he did that's very relevant to seeing around corners is he got them focused on leading indicators. So the company had very famously been focused on things like profits, quarterly performance, ship dates, stuff like that, that are all lagging indicators. They're great data, but it's about stuff you can't change. And what Nadella said was, no, I really want us working on leading indicators. And in the cloud, leading indicator is usage, tracks usage like a hawk. But before I get usage, I have to have the customers really liking what we're doing. And so he established as one of his number one leading indicators, customer love. I mean, can you imagine this from historical Microsoft? Like, it blows my mind. So he actually invited me out to speak at one of his very first big management meetings out in Bellevue, Washington. So I get off the plane, get to the ballroom where this event is being held, open the door, and on the back wall, tall as me, letters, it has the word empathy. And I was like, oh, shoot, I must be at the wrong conference. This can't be a Microsoft event. And at that event, they had an empathy walk. They talked about the importance of empathizing with your customer. They talked about the criticality of understanding customers' pain points. And I think just getting the company focused forward was hugely important. So another tip I would recommend for your listeners is think about what leading indicators you pay attention to. What are the things that foretell the possibilities of other things?
It's interesting. And so I can just imagine you're walking in and your expectations are completely doing a 180. And so if we put a pause on that for just a moment, because it's such an important point that you're sharing with us, and it really goes to the courage from a leadership side of things to say, I'm not going to do the way things were done before. That's the old way of doing things. This is the new way. But this is corporate America that we're talking about. I mean, it's Microsoft, but we're bringing in really this, what some people would call the soft side, the soft skills, empathy, love, how our customers are rating us. So what was that like for you, Rita, right then at that point in time? You're now leading the charge, in your talk, and you're at that conference. I mean, what's going on? What's going through your mind?
I think what was fascinating was that was very early in Nadella's change. It was before his book came out, the book he had reset, which he wrote. I think he wrote it for his employees to kind of really try to reinforce his message. And of course, it was very widely read by other people too. But I'd say that half the room was kind of in this model of, we're not really sure if he really means it, right? And the other half of the room, which I think had been a bit disenfranchised in the old Microsoft culture. The other half was like, yes, let's do it. Let's do the empathy walk. Let's be a better company for our customers. And interestingly, while I was there, they had a whole presentation on their not-for-profit efforts. And I forget the exact name of the program, but it's this program where employees get time off to work on great causes. Now, the other interesting thing that happened at that conference, and this is to show you Nadella he's not all fairy dust and pixies. I mean, this guy is super serious. So he had a CFO up there giving a talk about how every single business line leader was going to have to give up, I think it was like 7.9% of their revenue. So he could put that into a central innovation fund. You can imagine how popular that was. So he was like, we're turning this ship, but it's going to take resources to do that. And then I want to explain to you what sacrifices you're going to have to make. And if that's not a journey you want to go on, I get it, but that's the journey we are on. And so it was this combination of, let's really think about the human side of things, coupled with really tough business decision making.
A little bit of tough love thrown in there. Hey, here's the vision. We're going to take a softer approach, but a little bit of tough love. Here's what I need from you. And either you're with us or perhaps you're not. You want to think about that and ponder.
As a leader yourself, right? If you've got a bunch of people on the bus who don't want to be there and aren't willing to row along with the same thing, I mean, they're better off going somewhere where they'll be happier.
And so the more that we talk about this, and we go down this rabbit holes of this wonderful thing called inflection points of what they do, what they're not, what they are, the more we go here, it's really leadership and vision. And a lot of this doesn't show up in the hard skill side, on a complicated formula in some kind of spreadsheet. It's really part imagination, part courage, part empathy that we're putting together as a leader to steer the organization in that direction. That's a tough one for a lot of people that are probably hearing this. Wait a minute, that's not how I learned business. That's not what it's all about. How would you speak to that person? What would you say?
Oh, well, our classic concept of leadership, right, is metaphorically some person waving a sword on a horse saying, follow me. Right? And there are times when that's necessary. I'm sure you know of Ben Horowitz, the very successful entrepreneur, and he talks about wartime versus peacetime CEOs, and that there are just times when that behavior is necessary. But if you're trying to engage the whole organization in creative problem solving, that behavior is really destructive. So what I really also think we get wrong about leadership is if you talk to 10 people off the street about what are the qualities of a good leader, well, what do you get back? You get back, oh, good leaders are clear-minded and decisive and able to communicate well, and they give you a vision and they have clarity about where they want to drive the company. And at the same time, they're vulnerable, they're authentic, they're listening to people, they're great people. And it's like, who are these schizophrenic people that can't get running companies, right? Right? And so the way I like to think about it builds on the work of my colleague at Columbia, Hitendra Wadhwa. And what he talks about is, he said, in your inner core, in the sort of essence of who you are, you want a lot of stability there, right? So what are your passions? What's your purpose? What's your wisdom? What do you uniquely bring to the world? What do you love? What are you emotionally engaged with? Those things you want to build on and work on and be very kind of grounded in what those are offering you. At the same time, in the outer manifestation of how you lead in a particular moment, you've got to be very situationally adept. And I think one of the things we get wrong about leadership is we give people these long laundry lists of behaviors that represent great leaders. And so we're all busy trying to remember, okay, be authentic, look people in the eye, stand up straight, have presence, whatever your thing is. And I think that's actually not very helpful, because what you'll find is two people with very different behaviors can be quite effective even in a similar leadership situation.
Rita, let me ask you this, and I may be way oversimplifying things and you can set me on the right path here. In Seeing Around Corners, you talk about leadership during, we'll call it peacetime and wartime. And I don't want to put words in your mouth. My takeaway was, if one had to choose where to be, it was more on the wartime than the peacetime, because in the wartime, you're improvising, you're resilient, you're always looking for, okay, what could get in our way? What do we need to know about? What are we going to have to defend against? As opposed to peacetime, maybe it's a laissez-faire and what's going to be in life is great. And hey, let's just keep on doing what we're doing. Am I on base with that, off base? What would you say to that?
I think that depends on, first of all, your appetite for uncertainty and risk. If you're the kind of person who gets bored with everything being the same day after day, then you don't want a peacetime situation. Well, here's the great irony to me, which is because peacetime leaders are so often just kind of letting things roll, what is this incredible pattern where incredibly successful companies just ride that, right? They don't continuously challenge themselves. They don't continuously sort of almost put themselves into a wartime footing. And what ends up happening is this great success that they've enjoyed for years and years eventually leads to them becoming irrelevant because they haven't been making the effort. And we saw that with Xerox. We saw that with Nokia. We're possibly seeing it with some of the big tech giants today, right? Where, you're printing money for years and years. You're hiring all these people who've never seen the struggle. They've never experienced wartime. And so the first little setback and everybody freaks out. And of course, now we're seeing layoffs. We're seeing recognition that maybe we got a little fat and happy during peacetime. And whoa, there are battles to be fought out there and we're not fit for purpose. And what is fascinating to me, and I know you'll share this as someone who went through the whole .com bomb. I mean, there's so many people talking about this as though it's never happened before. Like this is a truly unique experience. We've never gone through, a setback in VC. We've never gone through the large scale layoffs in tech. Of course we have. We've been through this before. These things happen in cycles. And so one of my predictions, and this might be helpful to your innovators, your innovative listeners, is what a lot of the big companies are doing is they're not saying it, but they're essentially cutting back on innovation. So they're calling it things like rationalization. We're going back to the core. Zuckerberg's talking about the year of efficiency. What does all that mean? It means we're dropping all that weird, funky, experimental, high risk and high profit stuff. And we're retreating back into what we know. And so here's the opportunity. If you have the sort of intestinal fortitude to be willing to take some risks now, without sinking the company. Again, so appreciate your comment about experimentation, but you could be positioned because what's going to happen is 2-3 years from now, those self-same companies that fired all those people and got rid of their innovation functions are suddenly going to look around and go, oh my God, we've got nothing new going on. Now we need to get it. And for a lot of your listeners that might be looking to exit an entrepreneurial company, that's where the purchasing opportunities are going to be. Because all of a sudden, these big companies are going to realize they haven't been doing the job they needed to do to build up their pipeline of innovations all along. And they're going to be desperate looking for something on the market to buy.
So let me ask you this. For the listener who is eavesdropping on and saying, okay, yeah, I like what I'm hearing. You know what? I have a window here where I can innovate. I can have some thought leadership. I can really put myself out there. And I know through your podcast or through your thought sparks, or you have a wonderful newsletter and blog and they can come to the site. And again, it's in our show notes as a point and click. They can get all that. But for you and the person, and whether you're giving a keynote or a talk or even a virtual talk at a company event, or they're working with you and you're now really being brought on board to help lead the charge. What's your secret sauce? What's your process? I sign up today. Okay, Rita, here's our company. Here's what we're doing. Help us along the way. And Rita, rightfully, you're probably going to say, well, Jeffrey, it depends. Every company's different and, no two are alike. And it all depends on where they're at and what they're doing. And I get all that. Broadly speaking, though, what's some of that magic formula that you have to really bring that clarity to companies that we come out with the strategies that ultimately win?
I think the through line is that I really help people to think about and challenge their own assumptions, weakly or strongly held. So whether I'm talking about competitive advantage is no longer lasting as long as it once did in many parts of the economy, whether I'm talking about, we haven't trained people on how to be innovators, which is kind of a crime to me. I mean, it's a skill. You can learn it. There's no reason it should be some kind of big mystery. Or whether it's assumptions about the core business. So I'll give an example. I was doing some work with a Swiss private wealth manager, the private wealth bank. And it was one of the situations where I did interviews with the people before doing this big presentation. And they were all kind of whispering to me like, our CEO doesn't get it. Our CEO just doesn't get it. Can you figure out some way you can see it? So I went to talk to the CEO and as part of his preparation, and I said, so tell me what you think about innovation. He says, there hasn't been real innovation in private banking in centuries. You give me money today. When you come back in 20 or 30 years, there should be more of it. How simple could that be? And now this, of course, was in an era where if you were a Swiss company and you were in private wealth management, basically your business model was you leaned out the window and grabbed the francs flowing by. I remember asking one of their investment banker, one of their banking leaders, I said, so how do you get new clients? Because they were interested in being more entrepreneurial, blah, blah, blah. He said, we inherit them. I said, excuse me? He said, yeah, when the guy before us dies or retires, we get their book of business.
Wow.
So anyway, so for my presentation for that one, now that I understood the significance of the problem, what I did is I just pulled together a kind of a picture of all the different startups, the trends, the things that were new that were happening, and used that as part of the opening of the keynote. And literally by the time I was done, the CEO had gone a little pale. He was like, I think maybe we have some things we need to look into. Meanwhile, his team is like behind him where you can't see them. They're like, this is great. So I think it's the ability to really challenge what the prevailing assumptions are. The other thing that I think I bring to the table particularly is, I've been studying this a long time, and a lot of people who never have had to look at it, never have been trained in it. How do they even know where to start? And so I can kind of shortcut that whole process of putting this system into place.
It makes so much sense. I mean, from the KPIs of, okay, what are the leading indicators, not the lagging indicators, which we're probably at if we even have KPIs. A lot of us don't, and no judgment there, to having been there. And you've been on this journey, you've been around the block a number of times with some world-class companies or some startups, everything else in between. And for the listeners, let me put this out there. There's no judgment with this. Are you meeting perhaps with a fitness trainer because you want to learn the ropes at the gym or how to become fit? How are you going to have your company become fit? Are you going to be doing that on your own, or can you save some cycle time, save some effort, save some money, and you have a world-class thought leader like Rita who can come on board and get you there a whole lot quicker? To me, it makes a whole lot of sense, but everyone is on his or her own journey. But speaking of the journey, Rita, we've spoken about a lot of things today, and a listener can go in any number of directions with that. If I can put you on the spot, and you may say, Jeffrey, it's like having to pick of which is my favorite children. But if there's one thing, one strategy, one action before leaving this episode, before going into the next meeting or email or call that a listener could at least do or start thinking about doing, what would you suggest that be of all the things that are out there? What could be one thing to really get this moving forward in the right direction?
As a leader, the most powerful asset that you have is your own agenda. And by that, I mean where you're spending your time and attention. So what I would recommend is take the last 10 times you got together with people who are important to talk about important stuff and just look at the agenda for that meeting and think about, where does innovation, growth, new business development, the future, where do those things pop up? Because I'm telling you, if it's not item number 1, 2, or 3 for you, it's not going to be anybody's first priority anywhere else in the company. And that requires sacrifice, right? So if innovation or the future or inflection points are going to be important, that means something else gets shoved out of that top space. But if you as the leader don't make that a top priority, it's not going to happen anywhere else. So I would, if I couldn't advise them on any other thing, I'd say get a look at your agenda and get in control of it. And every meeting, every time you get together, when you randomly meet people in the elevator, you're going to be asking about innovation. When you're giving out the hero awards at the annual dinner, it's going to be people who had something to do with innovation. So if you don't keep it top of mind, nobody else will.
Some terrific advice. And speaking of advice, and before we go into wrap-up mode, what was really intriguing in the book, again, seeing around corners for listeners, get the book, click on the link, or if you're not the reading type, you can listen to it on the audiobook. I mean, it's all there in every format that you can imagine. At the very end, Rita, I was delighted when essentially you said, yes, we've been talking about business and strategies for optimization, but it doesn't have to be just for business. You can apply inflection points into your own life, and you give a whole prescribed formula. I mean, right there, if nothing else, that's the price of admission for reading the book and following what's going on, because you can agree, disagree. At Deep Wealth, our philosophy is business is very much personal. Whoever said business isn't personal has never been in business before, because if we get it right on the inside, and as you point out, if we have the right people around us on the personal side and things are just really clicking along, things will be that much better on the business side. And so for listeners who are saying, what do you mean? I can use all these corporate strategies on the personal side. Rita, from a very high level, how could you speak to that listener of how it's possible and what they actually could do?
Sure. So as you think about your career unfolding or your life, there are going to be these moments which have a very road not taken flavor to them, right? So you're going to make a consequential decision that takes you in one direction or another. And those really are your personal inflection points. And I would observe most people don't benefit enough from the ones that feel negative at the time. You lose a job, you have a falling out with a friend, an opportunity doesn't materialize that you were really hoping for, something negative or at least at first happens. And what we know from the research is events like that cause your brain to wake up, right? They cause you to instigate your imagination. They cause you to consider possibilities you wouldn't have considered otherwise. And how many people do you know who've had an event like that, who said, in retrospect, that was the best thing that ever happened to me?
Sure.
And I'm not saying you want disappointment. I'm not saying that's desirable, but what I am saying is inevitably it'll happen. And what you can do by leaning into it a little bit is say, okay, what have I learned? What assumptions were wrong? What is the world now? Because your brain is now open to things not going the way that you'd hoped. And back to wartime versus peacetime CEOs. If everything in your life just went the way you expected and hoped it to, you kind of get to the end of it. And it's like, what have I done? What have I accomplished? Sure. And I think that notion of having enough, not overwhelming and deadly, but enough challenge that you're staying on your edge, you're staying fresh.
I think what's nice about that, if I can use the word harmony, in the sense that, okay, I'm applying these principles in my personal life, obviously very personal, but I'm also applying the same principles, a little bit of a different twist on the business side. And you can really put the two in a way that propels both the business and the personal life forward. I mean, after all, as we say about Deep Wealth, we're not in business to be in business. We're not having a liquidity event to have a liquidity event. It's about optimizing our life for happiness, helping people, making a difference, changing society for the better. So let me ask you this, Rita. You've been generous with your insights and your wisdom, and I would love to go on. We need to start wrapping up, though. And so I have a thought experiment. It's a really fun one. Let me set this up for you. Think of the movie Back to the Future. And in the movie, you have that magical DeLorean car that can take you to any point in time. So the fun part, Rita, is tomorrow morning, you look outside your window. Not only is the DeLorean car there, but the door is open, it's waiting for you to hop on in, which you do, and you're now going back to any point in your life. Maybe it's Rita as a young child, a teenager, whatever point in time that would be. What are you telling your younger self in terms of life lessons or life wisdom? Or, hey, Rita, do this, but don't do that. What would that sound like?
Oh, I think it would probably be back to my first year in the PhD program.
Okay.
Because I gave up a job I loved, had a baby, moved to the suburbs. So I gave up the city. I gave up all my friends. I gave up everything. And then I walked into this world, having been a manager for 8 years, thinking maybe I knew something about management. And I'm sitting in the article reading, a journal article rather, by a guy named John Child. And the article was called something like In Defense of Managerial Choice. And I'm reading this, or the importance of managerial choice, basically saying what managers decide matters. And I'm like sitting there thinking to myself, like, if I didn't think that, why would I even be here? Like, this is the most insane premise I've ever heard. And I think I would want to tell that young person that I had entered into a holy monastery where there was kind of like the Latin speaking monks of old. There's like a ritual that you have to be initiated into. And that first year was really hard. You talk about inflection points and going up an S curve. It was so difficult. And I think I would have liked to give myself a little pep talk. It would have probably saved myself and my husband a lot of misery, because I would come home and I'd be like, I am not sure this was the right decision. I don't understand a word of what they're talking about. This makes no sense to me. And just to give you the sort of final on that little story, it turns out in management academia, there was this school of thought, which was called population ecology. And basically the school of thought was that organizations are like bugs, and that there's an environment that has a carrying capacity. And when there's a new bit of resource that opens up, all these entrepreneurs and companies will enter, and then the resource rapidly gets consumed. And then there's a dry off event, and population can be explained. Success and failure can be explained by population dynamics. And John Child was basically saying, no, actually what managers do matters. It's not all just explained by the external environment. So it was an actual real live debate in academia, but I had no idea what the backstory was.
I love that. And for that pep talk for your younger self, if you had to verbalize that in a word or a sentence, what do you think that would be for your younger self?
It would probably be stay the course. You'll figure this out.
That's some terrific advice. Isn't that the case with inflection points? Stay the course, you'll figure it out. And when you do, it's really good things ahead, no matter what the struggle is or what you're thinking you can or can't do. Some terrific advice. And Rita, let me ask you this for our listeners. And again, we're going to have all this in the show notes, from your books to the podcast, to your thought leadership, to your consultancy. But if someone has a question, or, hey, why don't you come in and give a keynote? Or, hey, how do we become a client? If they just want to reach out and get in touch with you, where's the best place online that they can do this? RitaMcGrath.com.
My very imaginatively named website. There's a contact us button there, and we watch that a lot, and somebody will get back to you. You can also find me on the Columbia Business School website. That's another place where my email's there. It's all public, so you can definitely reach out there.
Terrific. And again, for listeners, it'll be point and click. It'll be in the show notes. Well, Rita, it's official. This is a wrap. Thank you for your insights and your wisdom, your story from the trenches. We're the better for it. And as we love to say here at Deep Wealth, may you continue to thrive and prosper, Rita, while you remain healthy and safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was a pleasure.
The Deep Wealth experience was definitely a game changer for me.
This course is one of the best investments you will ever make, because you will get an ROI of 100 times that. Anybody who doesn't go through it will lose millions.
If you don't have time for this program, you'll never have time for a successful liquidity.
I mean, it was the best value of any business course I've ever taken. The money was very well spent.
Compared to when we first began, today I feel better prepared, but in some respects, maybe less prepared, not because of the course, but because the course brought to light so many things that I thought we were on top of that we need to fix.
I 100% believe there's never a great time for a business owner to allocate extra hours into his or her week or day. So it's an investment that will yield results today. I thought I will reap the benefit of this program in 3 to 5 years down the road. But as soon as I stepped forward into the program, my mind changed immediately.
There was so much value in the experience that the time I invested paid back so much for the energy that was expended.
The Deep Wealth experience compared to other programs is the top. What we learned is very practical. Sometimes you learn stuff that is great to learn, but you never use it. The stuff we learned from Deep Wealth experience, I believe it's going to benefit us both.
I've done an executive MBA. I've worked for billion-dollar companies before. I've worked for smaller companies before I started my business. I've been running my business successfully now for getting close to a decade. We're on a growth trajectory. Reflecting back on the Deep Wealth, I knew less than 10% what I know now. Maybe close to 1% even.
Hands down, the best program in which I've ever participated. And we've done a lot of different things over the years. We've been in other mastermind groups, gone to many seminars, workshops, conferences, retreats, read books. This was so different. I haven't had an experience that's anything close to this in all the years that we've been at this. It's 5-star, A+.
I would highly recommend it to any super busy business owner out there. And Deep Wealth is an accurate name for it. This program leads to deeper wealth and happier wealth, not just deeper wealth. I don't think there's a dollar value that could be associated with such an experience and knowledge that could be applied today and forever.
Are you leaving millions on the table? Please visit www.deepwealth.com/success to learn more. If you're not on my email list, you'll want to be. Sign up at www.deepwealth.com/podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, if it added value, if you walked away with some new insights and strategies, please leave a review on your favorite podcast channel. Reviews help us reach new listeners, grow the show, and continue to create content that you'll enjoy. And as we wrap up this episode, as always, please stay healthy and safe.